Hey, thanks, Michael. I'm Jack Nato. I'm the president and co-founder of Lunar Technologies, where we design and manufacture automated extraction equipment. And I'm here today at Dab Factory with Dario Flynn, who's the blast tech over here, and we're going to be talking about BHO safety. So with that, let's jump in. Dario, I think you'd give us a little bit about your background, maybe how you got into cannabis extraction, and then what you guys do here.
Yeah, awesome. So I got into the game, I would say, about 5 years ago. There was a small crew of us who were really anxious to kind of get into the cannabis scene back when things were going wreck, and I was lucky enough to meet up with the right people, and we created Dab Factory. We saw an opportunity for there to be a product made by us that wasn't flour. At the time, we had a lot of flour that was on the market, and we were looking, what can we do with all that extra flour that's out there? And maybe make some more money for some of these growers that are growing awesome stuff, but don't have a chance to quite get it out there, and it's just giving more options, and we're that middleman that we can help the growers.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Hey, I know you got a good story about how the name came to be.
Oh, yes. So at the time, I was working at the Cheesecake Factory, and it's quite a large company. There's a ridiculous amount of servers, at least at the one here in Oregon. And there was a bunch of people on the Cheesecake Factory team who were already in the mindset of like, cannabis is awesome, what can we do? How can we make some money, and how can we get in on this? And after a little bit of trying and figuring some things out, we were able to come up with the Dab Factory. So we went from being employees at the Cheesecake Factory to Dab Factory. And yeah, now we make all the dabs you can handle.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Such a cool story.
Yep. Yeah, BHO was like a pretty easy choice for us to kind of move into this side of the industry. Like I said, seeing where the market was at the time, it was kind of a easy option for us for sure.
Yeah.
But me, on the cannabis connoisseur side of it, I am seriously a huge fan of BHO. Dabs are like, that's where it's at. I think the flavors and some of the aromas that you're getting off some of the dabs are just, it's really hard to compete and find that in some of the other products.
Yeah, yeah. And since we're talking about BHO safety, there's a lot of, it's good to talk about the beginning and just that there's a lot of stigma around BHO. And so I know we get a lot of questions from people saying, hey, BHO, or really any hydrocarbon extraction, butane, propane, or ethanol, it's all flammable vapor.
Oh, yeah.
And so why would you use that instead of something like CO2 that's not explosive? And you were saying a little bit it's about the flavor and the aroma. Can you talk a little bit more about that, why you chose BHO?
Yeah, so with BHO, we have a whole full spectrum extract. So we are getting all the cannabinoids that are available. We're not playing doctor. I'm not adding anything in. I'm not pulling anything out. I'm a middleman, right? It's my job to find the growers who put in all the time in the research. They went pheno hunting. They found the right strains. They found the ones that work for them. And when they do a good job and they bring me their high quality stuff, I can do a good job. So making sure that we find the right growers is really the key. I'm not the magician here. I'm just the middleman. So once you do find the right growers who got all the good stuff, BHO is no question, because the flavors that are coming through are just unreal.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's kind of how like BHO started too. It started with a bunch of connoisseurs and a bunch of entrepreneurs and extractors who wanted to get the most out of the plant.
Oh yeah.
And so that's also what kind of created the stigma, because people wanted to do this. They stumbled upon butane and propane and realized it was just such a good solvent because it took exactly what you wanted out of the plant and not a lot that you didn't want. But there just weren't any tools really for BHO extractors, and so they started open blasting.
Yes, I mean that was the only way to do it. There was no closed loop system. We didn't really have options like that. We didn't have cool people like you who are investing their time and energy into creating these new products so I can be more successfetsuccessful. And yeah, open blasting back in the day is definitely a pretty scary story. You're talking about all these flammable gases and all of that. It's pretty quick and pretty easy. You can fill a room. And a room full of gases is going to be a bad time.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit. So the biggest hazards with butane and propane or any flammable vapor extraction is the flammable vapors. Butane and propane, they explode at the right concentrations in the right environment. And so open blasting was literally open. You're just blasting all that solvent, all that flammable vapor right into the air. And so once you hit a concentration that's explosive and then you have an ignition source, that's when you have accidents. And there was a ton of injuries and a number of deaths, like right at the beginning when this all started 15, 20 years ago. And then it created this bad stigma. And really I'd say it's not the fault of the people that were doing it. It's that the regulation didn't exist. There just wasn't like a set of rules for people to follow that would say, if you do it this way, you're gonna be safe and you're gonna get this really high quality extract. It just didn't really exist. So then after open blasting, we got closed loop extraction, which is what you've been doing for a long time now.
Yeah.
And what we're doing here.
Yep.
And that's where we try to keep all the flammable solvent inside the extractor. And inside the extractor, there's no air. Oxygen is what you need to create the explosion. And then there's no ignition sources, so that's also safe. And so in a perfect world, if you had closed loop extraction, how in theory it's supposed to be, ideally, everything stays in the extractor. But we live in the real world and there's still some risks involved, like there's accidental emissions where you can have an accidental release. And then also just because of the products that we make and some like rules of physics, we just end up losing a little bit of butane and propane during every run. And so with accidental emissions and then with, I guess you'd say purposeful emissions, which are really small, you do still have a risk. And that's mostly what we're gonna be talking about today, how to mitigate those risks. And I think you were saying earlier, Dario, that you have had a couple accidental releases of vapor.
Oh yeah. So even with the closed loop system, like you said, things happen. You know, sometimes you have parts of an equipment that fail, especially when things are under high pressures. When they fail, it's really quick and very obvious that something has failed. And like you said, anytime you're in a room full of gas, it's definitely a very dangerous spot to be. So being in a C1D1 room like we're in right now is definitely key. So for when we do have maybe an accident that might happen, or maybe a part might fail, things that are sort of out of our control. You know, like you said, we live in the real world, things happen.
Yep.
So being in a C1D1 room where we are in place to where the room is ventilated. So any of those extra gases that might be hanging out can get sucked out and not be so dangerous to me.
Yeah.
You know, we are an explosive proof room. If there were to be an accident in here, this is all contained. We don't have to worry about possibly getting our neighbors or, you know, causing a huge explosion, which is some of those things that we were running into when people were open blasting in the past.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So we're standing in a C1D1 room right now.
We sure are, yes.
Which means
it's a Class 1, Division 1 certified room, and that just means that all the walls are reinforced. This is not your typical wall. You're not just gonna hang a painting on this wall.
Yeah.
Reinforced, very thick, very safe. It's meant to hold any kind of explosion, so if something did go off in here, it'll stay contained within our C1D1 room within our facility.
And also all the electrical equipment in here, all of it is rated so that it can't create a spark pretty much no matter what happens.
Yep.
The C1D1 rating is the highest rating of explosion limits, which means that a lot of engineering goes into every single piece of electrical that you see in this room. And that's just about making sure that there's no ignition sources. C1D1 means that we assume at all times there's an explosive level of vapor in this space. Now, that's not right now. We're filming in here with electrical equipment because we shut off the equipment and we isolated everything. But the normal assumption is that there's always a level of, or an explosive level of vapor. And so we control that by ventilating like you were talking about, and then making sure all the electrical cannot create a spark pretty much no matter what happens. We also have constant gas monitoring.
Yes.
So over on the wall right there, and maybe right
Just
outside the
that one
booth,
spot. Yes.
we're monitoring for explosive levels of the flammable gases. So if anything does get even close to an explosive level, it's gonna warn you, and then you and the rest of your team can get out of the building, right?
Yep, and then you know, hopefully things don't get to anything that extreme.
Yeah,
the nice
yeah,
thing
yeah.
about our system is there's a couple different levels of ventilation. So right now we just have our normal air that's kind of moving through, but as soon as the gas levels go up, the ventilation kicks on, and you'd be surprised how quick all the atmosphere out of this room will be taken out. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and these are all just the typical engineering controls that you'd see in other industries
Of
that
course.
we're really happy are now in cannabis.
Thank goodness,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, so let's talk about the equipment a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
So on the skid, we have, we have a lot of controls. We're controlling the process. Everything on our system is fully automated, so it's run by a computer system. But we still have to move valves and things like that. So the way we do that is with air. So we're not sending high electrical energy into the booth. All of our valves are pneumatic, so it's controlled by the pneumatics. And then pretty much the most important thing that I'd say we do and that automation allows you to do is get Dario and the other techs who are running here outside the extraction room, because like this is the dangerous area, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. If we can get us out of the room, that's the safest place to be.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And before our equipment, you were running some other equipment, right? Could you describe that process, how it worked? And
Yes. So in the past, we were operating off of Sub-Zero, and we were not lucky enough to have any pneumatic valves, which meant that I had to pull everything by hand. So of course, you have to not only come in the room, but you also have to make sure that you're pulling everything at the right time. Waiting too long to pull a handle or to make something open one of your valves could definitely spell out a little bit of an issue if you have too much pressure in a locked container.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, we have a lot of safety controls on the software side too, which is it's a little lower level on the hierarchy of controls. We want to control, first we want to get people away from the hazard, but if you can't do that all the time, then you monitor the hazard, and we make sure that if pressures get too high, we're going to alert the operator, we're going to tell them something's going on, and then we're going to try to mitigate that on the software side first. So maybe it's about if we detect a leak, we isolate a valve, or after we run a vacuum check on the reactor, we'll warn you guys to say, hey, maybe your reactor's not shut all the way. Let's not start the run. Go check it out.
Absolutely. Yep.
I'm sure you probably run into a vacuum leak before.
I've failed a couple of vacuum checks. Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Get the big red light flashing outside.
It sure does. Yeah. But it's nice to know, having that vacuum check is awesome, because in the past, I would find out with a gas leak. You weren't always able to maybe do the vacuum check appropriately. So just another step that kind of helps keep us safe. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. Could you give us an idea of what your workflow is like with the equipment?
Sure. So, I start off my day turning on the chillers and getting everything down to temperature. And while the chillers are getting to temperature, I kind of come in here and put the machine together. What I mean by that is every single night we take the machine apart to an extent to make sure that it stays cleaned. When you run it consecutively, you're going to have all sorts of clogging. Of course, in the cannabis industry, I think most of us know it's a relatively sticky substance. So any kind of a mess will turn into a bad time really quick. So come in there, get the chillers on, get the equipment put together, and then we'll figure out what kind of material we'll be running for the day. It's a really quick and easy load with this bad boy. Just pop that off, throw in a couple of our socks that we already have ready to rock and roll, and then we just go ahead and hit the start button. It's as easy as that. As long as I put the lid on and the cannabis in the machine, everything is good to go.
Yeah.
Then we're lucky enough to step outside and hit start and see what happens.
Yeah, awesome.
It's definitely a really easy start to the day for sure.
Yeah. And how did packing the socks differ with the equipment you were running before?
Yeah, so before I had to actually take all of my material and stuff it into a tube. I had a little packing stick that I just stuck it in there. And honestly, it probably took me about 25, 30 minutes just to fill this little tiny column. And that was maybe 2 to 3 pounds worth of material. Now we're so grateful that we have your awesome little pucking machine. So our hydraulic press that we have right outside of our room is awesome because it takes all of our material, squishes it down into these awesome little pucks that then we can slide into our awesome socks. So you have these bad boys that are all pucked up and ready to go. And then you just pop open a lid, drop it in, and the whole process takes maybe 5 minutes to pull the sock out and then replace it. Where before I was looking at a half an hour and I'm playing with way more material.
Yeah,
it's definitely a win-win all the way around.
Yeah, earlier we were talking a little bit about how there wasn't much regulation on the safety side in cannabis, but I think that's changing a little bit now for the better, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about how just all the hoops you had to jump through, good hoops, to get your facility certified and up and running?
Of course. With any business, there is a certain amount of steps that you need to follow to be successful and also be compliant. And with us, there's, of course, the same situation. So there's quite a lot that goes into this. We didn't just pick a spot and start setting up shop. The first thing was we need to make sure we find a facility that was in the right zoning area. C1D1 rooms are only classified to be in specific spots of the city. So you might have a facility that is not C1D1 certified. Definitely have to make sure you find out about that. Getting the pre-commission and everything from Lunatech was actually very helpful. It was really cool to get a list of all the requirements that we need to have ready on our end before this ever even arrived.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think, you know, people kind of forget that there's so much effort that goes into getting this here, right? We didn't just set it down and then it's good to go. We had to get our electrical upgraded. We had to get our air conditioning upgraded. We had to get our water upgraded. These are all things that were pretty expensive and time consuming. You know, you definitely want to think about it and have all this stuff ready to go. And in addition to that, you know, we have all of our equipment that needs all the certifications. We need to have permits and things like that from the city, and all that stuff doesn't happen without having the right permits. And when we were looking around at a lot of the other equipment and some of the other extraction equipment that was available on the market, seeing that everything was certified and you had the permits and all the right zoning restrictions and everything that is required to actually get the building up and running, you know, it's quite the mission. There's a lot that goes into it, that's for sure.
Well, we've learned that over the last 6 years too, just that we go into a lot of different jurisdictions where maybe the fire marshal or the city inspector isn't really familiar with cannabis extraction.
Oh, yeah.
And so we have to do a lot of education. Like, hey, here's the codes that we're pulling from oil and gas. Here are the safety standards we're pulling from API or ASME. And this is why they apply to cannabis extraction. And these are the 5 things, or, you know, this is the list of things that you as the inspector should be checking us for. And like you're saying, we try to put together a really complete document package so that it's just really easy for you to talk to the fire marshal or whoever it is.
Yeah, so well, you know, because at the end of the day, I make oil. That's what I do, right? I don't weld machines, I don't put things together, so I don't know about that kind of stuff. You know, I need somebody like you to help me out, for sure, absolutely.
Yeah, so like some of the codes that we follow are ASME, for all of our vessels. They're all stamped and certified and built over in Illinois. And then more recently, as an industry, we've been helping to write the UL code for cannabis oil extraction equipment. It just came out in the last year. Finally, NFPA, the National Fire Protection Agency, has added cannabis to their code. So that's in some of the chapters of their code. But it's still it's still in its infancy. All these codes that have been created they're really short, and they're, I don't want to say they're a stopgap, but they're the first step into building out the regulations that we really need for cannabis extraction, which is too bad because we're moving on it. There's not enough push from the industry, I think, to get this all done. And in the interim, there's just a lot more work for us as an equipment manufacturer to work with all the regulators who maybe aren't familiar with it, and for our customers, for Dario, for Extractors, who also have to deal with the same inspectors and people who are also new to cannabis, and they don't have code to rely on. So we work really hard to just push the whole industry forward. I know you do too, and yeah. So I think we've covered pretty much everything in here on safety side.
Yeah, so.
Why don't we go outside, take a look at the outside of the booth.
Let's do it.
Cool. All right. Yeah, now we're outside the booth, and we're at the control system, which is where you guys probably spend a lot of your time.
Oh yeah. Yep. Hang out here a lot.
Yeah. So like we were talking about in there, a lot of the importance of running automation is to get operators away from the hazards. And so that's what we're talking about now. Being outside the booth, being able to run the whole system, pretty much like you were talking about earlier, you hit the start button, and then you can monitor everything from here. So we're looking at pressures and temperatures, which have a big effect on safety.
Oh, yeah.
So you can maybe spot a leak, maybe spot if something's out of whack and you need to check it out. We also have all of our auxiliary systems here, so all our chillers and heaters and pumps. And we also have manual control. So if something does get out of whack, if you have to do troubleshooting, you can do it from out here. You can just click a valve and then override the status, either flip it to on or off. And then also, like what we were talking about, everything's recipe driven. So these guys are just selecting the recipe that they've put together, and then they're just hitting the go button.
Yep, most days.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
And then another great thing about automation is just that we log everything that happens. So if there's any safety events and it pops up a message, we'll just throw it in the data log so anyone can come take a look at it later. And if we're doing remote troubleshooting, which most of our troubleshooting is remote, we'll just hop on the phone with the customer, with Dario, and then we'll log into the system and we'll see what happened usually. We can check the data logs, dig back into it, and try to troubleshoot.
And I can say firsthand, it's really nice to have like another person looking at the system, even though they're not there. You know, my eyes, I can only see so much, but getting to see the data live as it's coming through is like, it's been very helpful for sure.
Yeah. And then another huge important feature of automation, or just of an electrical system in general, is that we have an emergency stop. So if anything goes wrong, if these guys notice something that's really wrong, they can just hit the E-stop and it'll just, you hear the air valves closing all the valves, it isolates everything, pops up a big warning and a big light, and just lets everyone in the area know something happened and we need to stop it. And another great thing is that these guys can run the whole system from their phone or from a tablet or a computer. Yes. So you can really get away from the extractor and maybe go run your ovens or something like that.
Yeah, you know, it's nice kind of having another look on things. You know, when my partner Jeremiah is not, or when he's here and I am not here, and he might have a question before we have to go bug you guys, it's kind of nice. I can pull it up on the app and see where he's at in the process and see all the information that I see on the HMI right here. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, so from a safety perspective with BHO, again, we're looking at the biggest hazard, or the hazard that really we're talking about exclusively, is just solvent release and the flammable vapor. And so we mitigate that by first containing it in the system with closed loop extraction, and then if any escapes, we mitigate that risk with the C1D1 enclosure, making sure that all the electrical is not going to cause a spark, and making sure that we ventilate all of it out as fast as we can, like Dario was talking about with the purge fan. And then the next way we mitigate is just by getting people away from the hazard, getting them out of the booth, standing out here instead of being in there.
Yep. Yeah, and I definitely like not going in and out of the room all day. It helps. There's a couple of steps for sure.
Yeah, all right. I think we'll end here and just take some questions.